in the historic origin of this act. If you read this, and I think, one thing I would like to suggest is that we should all read like we read Tada or Pota very carefully. It's a very useful exercise to read the act, which is so lethal and probably more dangerous, if not more. It's really a lethal act, as bad if not worse than Tada or Pota in several respects. The historic origins of this bill go back to 1962-63, when the National Integration Council, in its wisdom, decided that there is need to have an act which would abridge the freedom of speech and expression, freedom to assemble peacefully, etc. If an organization or person is deemed to preach or propagate anything that endangers the unity and integrity of the country. Of course, the context was the 1962 war, Sino-Indian War, in which Indian states suffered an humiliating defeat. It's in that hysterical climate, probably the National Integration Council thought that anything that, having suffered this defeat, that we need a special law which can proscribe organizations or stop individuals or persons from preaching anything that is amounts to disintegration or challenges the unity or integrity of the country. Now, when the law was enacted, it followed a judgment of Supreme Court. It's slipping my mind. I think if my memory serves me right, it was the case of B.B. John versus Union of India, way back in 1961-62, which had laid down that any organization which bans, that there is a certain procedure that has to be followed, and the rule of law demands that organization which is going to be banned should be given an opportunity to defend itself. So therefore, whatever material that the government has, on the basis of which they decide that an organization should be banned, should be shared with that organization, so a fair opportunity is given to that organization to defend itself and to argue for that organization not to be banned. While it was not followed completely in the 1967 Act, which was passed in the 1967 Act, if you read the Act itself, there are a certain procedure which is laid down before you can ban an organization or allows an organization to defend itself. And a fair amount of, relatively fair, I'm using the word very, very carefully, an opportunity is provided to that organization, which to a certain extent tallies with the Supreme Court judgment. And it was still the climate where it could be done. In 2004 and especially in 2000 Act, and this is very interesting, in 2008, when Government of India decided to do away with Pota, they decided that the provisions of Pota should be incorporated in Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. So barring confession, virtually all provisions which were part of Pota got incorporated into it. Some provisions became even worse than what was provided for in Pota, particularly where interception is concerned. But in 2008, after 2611 incident, Parliament met and made the Act, empowered themselves even more and incorporated certain provisions which are downright dangerous. Now remember that 2611 is something which took place which showed complete inability of the state to deal with a situation which they have been talking about for 30 years. India has been talking about that it faces terrorist threat or threats from terrorist organizations from 1980 to 2008, having spent thousands of crores of rupees in the name of fighting terrorism and internal security. In 2008, we found that Indian Navy and the Indian Coast Guard were unable to intercept the boat, that the Bombay Maharashtra police lifted the security near many of the places, including Taj and other hotels. They had lowered because they believed that there was no such threat facing Taj Hotel. We find that they had no building designs available to share with the police commandos. We find that NSG could not arrive on time. Why? Because there was not plane to bring them, so they had to wait for 12 hours. After landing in Mumbai, they had to wait for another couple of hours before bus could be provided to ferry them from Bombay airport to the sites where this incident was taking place. And yet, the failure of the state to do something that it has been claiming for 30 years became an occasion for further empowering this act and making it appear that, but because we did not have a very strong act, therefore we could not prevent such activities from taking place. It was an utter failure. If you look at from incident, what took place to what happened during those entire 60 or 62 hours, it's very clear that it was not for lack of law. It was sheer inability of the state to act on what it has been claiming for 30 years. Now, having enacted the act, one of the most pernicious aspects of the provision, and the parliament is also very interesting. When the parliament met, there were not too many members present in the house to discuss such a serious issue which threatened India. Now, one would expect if the parliament is so concerned, or the Indian political parties from right to left, which were present in the Indian parliament, was so concerned about security of this country and was so concerned about the threats posed to India from across the border, that they would at least show some degree of seriousness to participate in a debate which was taking place. If you look at how many members were present during that day and different sessions of the parliament, you discovered when the act was passed, between 56 to 93 members of parliament were present in Lok Sabha to discuss and approve this act. So this is the degree of seriousness shown by the state. Obviously, where national security is concerned, everybody believes that whatever the government does is right, and therefore we need not participate or raise questions or even discuss this matter, and it should be passed. One of the things that they did was, now in the 1967 Act, as I explained, when you ban an organization and declare it to be unlawful, and unlawful is defined, these are actually provisions which are quite akin to provisions which already exist in IPC. Sedition, for instance. It covers more or less the provisions that are present in the definition of unlawful organizations as provided for in this Act. But in 2008, they added another provision which could ban organizations which were declared to be terrorist organizations. Now, what are the provisions for declaring an organization? If you read the Act, you discover that unlike all unlawful activities, unlawful organizations, when terrorist organizations are concerned, all that the government requires is that if they find in their subjective understanding that such and such organization poses a threat or is a terrorist organization, that suffices to put that organization's name in the notification. Once you have added the name of an organization, then that organization can fight tooth and nail for years and decades to come. But they'll never get any fair hearing where it could be decided whether the ban imposed on them was fair or not. Now recollect, in 1992, after the demolition of Babri Masjid, RSS was banned, Jamaat-e-Islami was also banned, right? Vishwa Hindu Parishad was also banned. Very easy. They did ban RSS and Vishwa Hindu Parishad, but they deliberately made the case so weak that when it went to the tribunal, they threw it. They threw out government's claim by saying that there is no adequate evidence provided or material laid shown to the tribunal which justifies the ban imposed on the tribunal. The same was not true for Jamaat-e-Islami. The point I am trying to make is, look at how subjectivity enters the whole banning procedure. How the government, even in the process of banning, can make a very weak case which they know would be thrown out, versus where it is determined to pursue or persecute an organization, then they'll go out of their way to collect material so that the tribunal finds it difficult to ban an organization. Now, one of the things that happened in 1992 when the Jamaat-e-Islami challenged the provision of ban was that it went to Supreme Court. The Supreme Court decided, in violation of the rules which are part of Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. You see, when an act is passed, in order to impose the act, you require rules. And these are the legal procedures that are part of it. Now, in the rules, it is very clearly mentioned that the material, that even if there are secret documents that are presented before the tribunal, that the government is obligated to share that information with the organization which is being banned. Supreme Court ignored that rule and upheld that the government has the right to withhold sharing of information, secret documents, if it believes that it could prejudice national security. Now you have an act, therefore, which bans an organization like, say, CIMI, because CIMI case is very, very interesting, and I think it highlights, it exemplifies what is so pernicious about this act. CIMI was banned. In all the material that has been submitted to any of the tribunals, there is not a single case that the government has been able to marshal to suggest that CIMI has been implicated in any act of violence or any crime which are committed by CIMI or its members, which would make it possible for the government to justify the ban. What did the government do last year when it went before the tribunal? Very simple. It presented an envelope to the tribunal judge. Now last year when that envelope was presented to the tribunal judge, it so happened that Justice Geeta Mahajan looked at it and rejected that material. She said that this does not suffice, that this is too vague, that this is a repetitive, that this is something which the government has been claiming for several years and there is no basis for it. And just because it makes this claim and presents that material again and again doesn't lend any credibility to that material. So it was rejected. Within 24 hours it went to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court gave a stay order.